Hello and welcome to the Owl's Nest. Today we're going to be doing the 2020 Overwatch League team preview of the Toronto Defiant. So the Toronto Defiant had a pretty rough season last year as they finished 8-20 and 17th place in the league, which is obviously not what the team was going for their inaugural season. So they have pretty much cleaned house and they have an entirely new roster, which I think brings a lot more promise, and they'll definitely improve over last year, which is nice. So the only player from the original team for the Toronto Defiant is going to be Rocky, and he's a support player and he's going to be a two-way player. I think this is probably a good person to save from the last group. However, I don't think he's going to start a whole lot once we go through the rest of the roster. But it's nice to still have a little bit of the previous Defiant, but like I said, this is almost a completely new team and I don't really know what to expect from them. So next up is going to be Logix and Mangachu. So they are DPS players who joined the Defiant midway through last season. It was around, I think, stage 3. And they overall showed a lot of promise. Logix is a great hit scan player and Mangachu is a pretty good projectile player. So I think this will be nice for the Toronto Defiant. I don't know how much they're going to start over the other DPS players who we'll get to in a little bit. However, I like the additions. Now if we go into who they signed this year during the offseason, and I think it will most likely be their starting roster, it's pretty impressive. A lot of them had great years last year. None of them were championship contenders necessarily, but I think it's overall pretty solid, and also, we'll get to this a little later, a very marketable roster. So first up is going to be Kariv. Kariv was a support player for the Los Angeles Valiant over the last 2 years. Kariv had a pretty quiet presence up until stage 4 of last season where he popped off on Ana. He had on-point sleep darts, and overall, he gave Los Angeles Valiant fans a little bit of hope in an overall pretty down season last year. But he's going to be joining the Defiant next year, and I think that'll be pretty good for him. I think that he's an alright off support. I don't think he's the best in the league, but I definitely don't think he's the worst. So I don't think that's a terrible addition for Toronto, and definitely an improvement for them. Next up is going to be Agilities coming from the Los Angeles Valiant as well, and I think that's a good pickup as well. I think as a flex DPS, he's going to be great for them. He was pretty good on the Valiant, and overall, he's a World Cup player for Canada, and I think he'll be great for the Defiant as well. Next up is going to be Beast, and Beast is coming from Fusion University, and I think this is probably one of my biggest question marks for the Defiant. I like Beast, but I don't know if he's the only thing they should be having on main tank. I would suggest maybe they pick up another main tank player. However, Western main tank players are pretty rare in the league, so I don't know if I trust Beast being the full-time starter, but he has a lot of potential, and his role on Fusion University was nice, so we'll see if that maintains. Next up is going to be Surefour. Now, Surefour was one of the star players for the Los Angeles Gladiators last year and the year before, and he was overall a great player, but he is going back to his Canadian roots and also joining the Toronto Defiant, and I think this will be good for them. I like Surefour a lot. Like I said, I don't think he's the best DPS player in the league, but I definitely don't think he's the worst, and I think I could see him in almost a team captain role for this Defiant team. Next up is going to be Kelix, and Kelix is coming over from the Boston Uprising, and I think this is another great signing. I think Kelix had a great first year in 2018, but I think 2019 was overall just a pretty down year for the Uprising, but I don't know if that's necessarily Kelix's fault. We'll definitely see next year. I think that he has a lot of potential for the Toronto Defiant, but we'll have to see how it plays out. And finally, one of the more interesting signings is going to be Nevix at off-tank. Nevix was on the bench behind Choyobin for the San Francisco Shock, but now he's getting his chance to start for the Toronto Defiant, and I overall like the signing. I think that Nevix being on the bench probably credited Choyobin a lot, just because Choyobin was the best off-tank last year, and Choyobin has credited Nevix to a lot of what he learned. So I imagine that Nevix will be pretty good for this Toronto team. Now overall they are at 9 players right now, so they could add more, but if we're looking at the roster currently, I think there are some pros and cons. I don't think any of these players are necessarily bad players. I think they're all really talented. I'm just worried that I don't think that they're amazing players, and I think that could be the limit for the Toronto Defiant. I don't think they necessarily have a low floor, but I think they definitely have a pretty low ceiling. I don't see them improving a whole lot, but maybe their synergy overall would help them next year. But I think one of the plus sides of the team is I think all these guys are overall going to be really marketable for the Defiant. A lot of these names are really big and were star players for the first 2 seasons, so the fact that they're all in one place is going to be great for the Toronto Defiant business-wise, as well as I think it'll help with team chemistry. I think these are all great personalities and they'll get along together really well, and I think that's one of the best things Toronto has going for it. This team reminds me a lot of almost like a Houston Outlaws 2018 team. I think they'll see about the same success as we'll get to in the schedule, but I think overall this is a great step up for the Toronto Defiant. They definitely improved. I don't know if I'd call them a championship contender, but I like the team so far. So after that being said, let's go ahead and go into the schedule preview for them. Alright, so next up we're going to be going through the schedule for the Toronto Defiant. First up is going to be a matchup with the Paris Eternal, and I believe that they are going to win this one. I think Paris has definitely improved for next season, however, I don't think we're going to see it in their first match, especially considering their star player Sparkle hasn't turned 18 yet, and I think they still have some work to do on overall chemistry, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to have that one going to Toronto first. Next up is going to be the Fusion. I'm going to say they lose this one. I think both teams have definitely improved over the past 2 years, but I think Fusion has the edge. I like their acquisitions a little bit more than I like Toronto's, and I think that they have some potential there. Next up is going to be the Atlanta Reign, and I'm going to say that they lose this one as well. I think Atlanta has improved a lot, and especially how they surprised everyone by finishing 6th place last season. I don't think anyone saw that coming, and I think that they'll definitely keep that going with their acquisitions of Hawk and Edison. I think that's overall a pretty good lineup for them, and I think that's also a little bit better than how Toronto's improved, but I think that could be a close one. I'm excited for that matchup. Then we're going to have the Houston Outlaws, and I'm going to say they actually lose this one as well. For similar reasons that I brought up for the Reign and the Fusion, I just think their acquisitions are a little bit stronger. I think that'll be a close one though. Toronto and Houston are very similar teams to me. I think they'll perform about the same, so I'm just going to have them losing that one as well. Next up is going to be the Florida Mayhem, and I think Toronto will win this one. I'm a little bit nervous for Florida next year. I haven't seen enough moves from them that make me think they're going to be radically different. They have definitely brought in some interesting coaches and players from Runaway, and I'm interested to see if they do a little bit more. I'm holding off a team preview yet. I haven't seen a lot of roster moves from Florida that inspire me, so we'll see. Next up is going to be the Justice, and I think Toronto has their number too. I think Justice definitely finished last season hot, but I don't think that it's enough to beat the Defiant in their new form. It'll be interesting. I have so many question marks about the Justice that Corey and Stratus definitely finished well last year, but I don't know if they're enough to carry a team. Corey's definitely talented. I'm a little nervous on Stratus, but we'll get to them later. Overall, I have Toronto taking this one. Then we have the Boston Uprising, and I'm going to give this win to the Toronto Defiant as well. A lot of my concerns for Florida and Washington carry over to Boston. I'm confused by their new lineup. I don't know if I like it, and I definitely want to see it in action before I talk positively about it. I'm not huge on it. So I'm going to give that win to the Defiant. Next up is going to be London. London's an interesting team. I don't sleep on them because they have definitely gotten rid of a lot of the players that made them notable and the players that overall won them the Season 1 championship. But some of their new names are interesting. However, I am going to say that the Toronto Defiant take this for now. I think London has some work to do, but they could be a good team. But I think Toronto is just overall more established at this point. Then we get the Fusion again. I'm going to say that the Defiant win this one. I think especially after a hot streak against some weaker teams that I think the Fusion could take this. Or my apologies, I believe the Defiant could take this. Then is the Florida Mayhem again. I think Toronto will take this one as well for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. Then we get the Outlaws again. I'm actually going to say Toronto wins this one. I think they split the series. I think overall the Fusion, the Outlaws, and Defiant, I have them all around the same point for next year. And I think that, I feel pretty confident that the Outlaws will lose that one. But overall a split series there. Then we have the Atlanta Reign at the Toronto homestand. I'm going to say they lose this one. I was almost going to say they win because it's in Toronto, and that definitely... Home field advantage is pretty underrated in Overwatch. I was at the Dallas Fuel event, and overall, the environment of a homestand is really beneficial to the home team, but I don't know if it's enough to get them over Atlanta. So I'm going to have them losing that for now. Then we have the Washington Justice again, and I think Toronto will take this one for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. And then we go down here to Boston, which I think Toronto will win as well. So overall, kind of a rough start to the season, but we see 4 losses early, but a lot more wins for them. So I think that'll be good. Now we get London again, and I think that they'll win this one as well for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. Maybe we see a little more established London by this point in the season, but I'm just not sold yet. Then we get the Dallas Fuel. I think they'll beat the Fuel. A lot of you guys were surprised by my takes by the Fuel. I don't think they're strong enough yet, and the moves they make don't inspire me to think they're going to be radically different next year. But I think they'll be better than they were. I just don't think they're going to be a top 10 team like I think Toronto might be. So I'm gonna give Toronto the win there. Next up is the Shock, and I think the Shock will beat Toronto. The Shock are just looking so good next year. I don't see that changing. And then we have the Los Angeles Valiant. I think that will be a win for Toronto. I think Valiant's in a bit of a rebuild for next year. I don't know if they're gonna be that strong, but we're gonna go ahead and give Toronto that win. Next up is the Los Angeles Gladiators. I think Toronto will take that one as well. I think there's a lot of question marks for me with the Gladiators next year. I like some of their additions, but DPS is really worrying to me, and I want to see what else they do there. Next up is going to be the Vancouver Titans. I'm going to say Toronto loses this one in the Battle of Canada. But I think a lot of people are saying that Vancouver lost the offseason, which is true. They definitely got worse, but they were already at such a high point at the start of the season that I don't think it's going to affect them too much. And worst case scenario, they'll just sign another main tank. I think they'll be okay. Then they get the New York Excelsior, and I think they will lose this one as well. New York is looking really good next year. New York has always looked good. They just struggle in the postseason, but I don't think they're going to have a bad season. I think they're going to be great, and I think they might actually be better than Vancouver. But I think they're definitely going to lose that one to the Excelsior. Next up is going to be a loss to the Shanghai Dragons for me. I think Shanghai has improved very quietly. A lot of their additions look great. And if you guys watched the Shanghai Masters tournament, Shanghai looked really good in it. Lip and Stand 1 both look great for them. And I think they're just looking a little better than Toronto is right now. Then we get the Chengdu Hunters. The Chengdu is so hard to predict. That team's preview I'm kind of dreading because they're just so weird of a team, you know? Let's see. I'll give it to Toronto for now. I might change in my Chengdu preview, but Chengdu just confuses me. I'm going to be honest. Team China was dominant in the World Cup, though, so it's hard for me to decide. But yeah, I'm going to say Toronto's going to win that one for now. Next up is the Hangzhou Spark. This one's close too. I'm going to say the Spark take it, just because of how well their season went last year. This one's close too. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Spark on this one. And then Guangzhou again. Well, this is a rough second half of the schedule. This is crazy. Guangzhou, I think that Toronto will lose as well. Guangzhou, very similarly to Shanghai and Atlanta, had a really great end of the season last year. And I think a lot of the additions they made are pretty good. I'm still curious on how Neptuno's going to perform, but I think they'll be good. And then the Seoul Dynasty, it's another tough one. I'm going to say that they lose that one as well, unfortunately. Yeah, I feel confident with that. I think Seoul has a lot of potential last year. They signed some great Korean all-star players, but we'll see how it goes. Next up is going to be the New York Excelsior. And I'm going to give this one to the Excelsior for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I just think NYXL is looking even better than they did last year. So I'm going to give them the win there. And finally, we're going to have the Paris Eternal. I'm going to go ahead and give that one to the Toronto Defiant. I think Paris will definitely be a better team in the second half of the season, but I think Toronto still has the edge. So let's go ahead and finish this up in the summary portion. So overall, I have the Toronto Defiant going 16-12 next season. I think they definitely play a pretty tough schedule if we're looking overall matches, especially that back half is pretty brutal. But I think this is overall definitely an improvement for Toronto, and I think they could have a shot at a playoff run, at least a spot in the play-in tournament. So what are your guys' thoughts? Do you guys think Toronto's going to be really good next year, really bad next year? Or are you with me that like middle high of the pack? I think that's a good spot for Toronto for me right now. So that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed. We're going to have some more team previews on the way and roster news if it comes up. And I hope you guys all enjoyed. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and have a great new year. I don't know if we're going to get a team preview up before then, but I hope you have a good, safe time and enjoy. I'll talk to you guys later.